I guess we're just going. There's no preamble. We're just talking. So Darth recently released that one scene about Jedi Hermits with Sam. That was one of the talking points that we had. The other was Deadpool and Wolverine. We're just gonna see what happens. There's no structure to this whatsoever. Um, y'all talked a lot about how I thought the funniest detail in that whole recording session, Darth, was you explaining to Sam that like the reason that Yoda exists is Lucas went, I killed the teacher. What do
I
I
killed
do?
Obi-Wan. Yeah.
Which is so funny to me because it's the most like George Lucas coded thing of all time. To like, because we've talked about before that he just didn't care. Like he was just like, I'm figure it out as I go. And to paint yourself into a corner where you're like, I just I I need someone to teach this kid magic wizard. I killed the only wizard in the world. Um,
So I haven't going with that meta. What did you say? Meta textual thing earlier. Like I haven't gotten to that part of the video yet, but I think that's important because to me, Yoda always sticks out as the one non-heroic uh, defeat of all the Jedi because there's the trope of or the thing that people say of like, oh, the Jedi, well, they've run away before when they've been defeated, etc. But a heroic defeat is like, I've lost this, and now I'm going to go. I've lost this, and I can't go that way anymore. So now I'm going to go this way. So, um, and
Obi-Wan
Jedi
protecting Luke.
exactly. So Obi-Wan is not hiding away. I mean, he is when we meet him in Kenobi, but he is also kind of watching over Luke. It's just over the course of that series, which I mean we could also we've delved into that before, but over the course of that series, like he has his like little sort of arc where he is not afraid to be a Jedi anymore, etc.
I've really
But
soured on that show since we talked about it. By the way, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, it just really saps a lot of what makes the confrontation between Vader and Obi-Wan interesting in retrospect in A New Hope. Like it just takes so much of that pathos and just like as much as I enjoy some of the ideas, yeah, it's just like, man, I think that show like it misses me the more I think about it, I guess. But yeah, I think that's a good point. But I think the corollary to that is maybe that it's that Obi-Wan, see, I'm not even sure in that show that he gets to a point where he's not afraid to be a Jedi anymore. I think he gets to a point where he's not afraid to acknowledge and like acknowledge that trauma and like that was a part of me and I need to accept it. Like I think it's more about accepting that it's over than necessarily it is about coming back to it. If that makes sense, because then he just like hermits out for like 20 years in the desert or whatever.
yeah, I thought. Well, I think the lesson he's supposed to learn, I think, is that Luke's going to be okay without him watching his every move. Isn't that
Yeah.
right?
The lesson
Right.
was trust the Force and it'll work out. So like the entire thing kind of was pointless, almost.
Yeah. Right.
Trust the
Is
Force and it'll all work out.
Yeah, because that, guys, I've checked. That seems to super not be the case. It seems like every guys, I hate to be that guy, but it seems like every time we trust the Force, some other proto-Nazi movement rises. And you know what? Ain't that just life? You know? Ain't that just life in America?
And ironically, that's like one of my biggest arguments for why his whole idea of I'm gonna be on this island, I'm gonna get rid of the Jedi so we don't have this constant conflict that keeps coming up of the Sith trying to beat the Jedi. So if the Jedi just disappear, then the Sith will never have anyone to fight, so they'll never rise to power. But like you just said, you that's not how it works.
No.
You have to have the good guys fighting the bad guys because there will always be bad guys.
Mm, no.
Are we talking about in Star Wars or in
Pretty
real
much
life?
historically.
Well, I mean, historically, yes, but the that is part of the whole modern day like misunderstanding of like what balance in the Force is, right? That you've got like bad guys and you've got the good guys, and the bad guys are the imbalance. If you have nothing but good guys, then you are balanced. according to like how the Force works. It is any bad guys at all that create imbalance.
Yeah, but that's not how Luke was talking about it in TLJ.
But what I'm saying is that how that is part of the issue with Luke in The Last Jedi is that's born out of a misunderstanding of how the Force works.
Do you think that that is, and obviously,
Not by him, but by Johnson.
or well, but also maybe by Luke as well, right? Like I think one of the things that that film tries to approach is that like if you think about Luke's journey, he never really like came into. I'm talking about again in canon, not extant material, right? Because you look at the Zahn trilogy, and I think it does a much better job of addressing what does this hero do after like the wartime is over, and what does that like this 25-year-old kid like what does that do to you? But I think the Luke in the Last Jedi, I think part of the critique is going, yeah, maybe like because Luke never had a teacher and he never had this institution of the Jedi. He never was like he never fully acquired the same understanding, and particularly the institutional understanding of the Force that the Jedi kind of present, which is exactly what you're saying, which is like, okay, if in fact balance looks a type of way, why is it that we are so ineffectual? Why is it that the Republic collapses when, in theory, we're maintaining that balance? And the answer ends up becoming because they're living in some sense of denial and not addressing the fact that, in Phantom, they're losing the ability to see the future, and they're sort of weakening, and they have this corruption at the heart of the order and things like that. But I wonder if Johnson's attempt there is to critique Luke's understanding without this institution, and to maybe then acknowledge that the institutional understanding might also be flawed in some capacity. That in some way, trying to quantify this thing and put boundaries on this thing and put categorizations on this thing might in fact be part of the mistake. And that is why Luke kind of eschews all of that, because connecting to that means connecting to the institutional understanding of the thing rather than the thing itself. And in some ways, that's fundamentally what the film is about when it comes to Rey. And then in other ways, I think the film misses that by being a bit too sad about it, is maybe the way to say that.
Well, I think if that were true, and I don't think it is, I
Mhm.
think it would be a point of, I would hesitate to say brilliance, but uh, good craft, if you will. If that were true, what you're describing, but I don't think that that's true. I think what we got was born out of a misunderstanding of of how the Star Wars universe works. That's
And
that's my opinion. But real quick, I want to go back to the thing about Yoda uh, in regards to Luke is that um, so Luke had his heroic defeat, and he is the point of, well, what a hero should do is still actively be doing something. And the thing that always I always find funny whenever I've tried to write a script about this, or but when I'm kicking around it in my head, I go, he's actively doing nothing. is
Yeah.
what he is on purpose not doing anything because because of this idea that he has that he wants the Jedi to die with him. Um, Now, one of the other things that I would say is that I believe, if I understand what Johnson was going for, is that Luke is wrong about pretty much everything in there, and that it's supposed to be Rey that shows him that, but it's not really. Really, it's Yoda, which is another problem with that whole thing. Um, but yeah, it's ultimately whatever Luke is advocating for or espousing in that movie when he's talking to Ray and about his motivations for doing whatever he's doing, he's wrong
Yeah, exactly. And I
on
think,
purpose by Johnson. I'm not saying that's a mistake by him. I'm saying
yes.
Johnson on purpose is making him wrong.
And that's an idea that Sam teases out, I think, really effectively. in his usual incredibly articulate way, where he kind of takes that as the baseline and goes, okay, if that is true, which like textually that is true, in the film, if that's the case, then what, right? And I think part of the difficulty putting this in context with a character like Yoda is like, it's to me, it's not only that you know, if you look at Yoda and Luke in their respective hermit eras, which I think we've all had one, and we will have one again. I look forward to my second coming. When you go through that exercise as this errant knight, I think one of the things that you have to contend with is where a lot of the imagery of the original trilogy came from, and the inspiration and some of the cultural artifacts that then embellish and create what we consider to be the inspiration for a lot of this stuff. And I think you can't go past things like Berserk when you think about this, right? You have a wandering mercenary sellsword who used to be part of this golden age, who is now kind of fallen and kind of dogged by their past, and chooses to eschew themselves from society. And I think Sam did a really effective job of putting the idea of the kind of retired hermit wizard, sort of putting that in opposition to that wandering sellsword, and going, these things, there's a Venn diagram certainly at times, but they're not necessarily mutually inclusive. And I think, and this is where I'm interested in Darth's thoughts as a kind of purist, I guess, for some of the stuff, is like, there's an extent to which it works for me with Yoda in Empire, because it's an incredibly dark film, you know, in comparison to A New Hope, and he ends up being, he's never funny, but he's like a weird little freak, or he's pretending to be. And I think that facade is different than Luke, where Luke doesn't have a facade, right? There's no, it's not like Rey arrives and he's like, I'm gonna pretend to be a different type of guy than I am. And I think that is part of the big difference in how they operate in the films that they're contained within, is there is no hidden interiority for Luke in the way that there is with Yoda, that makes it effective when you realize, like, oh, this guy used to be the boss of this institution that up until this point we have no context for, except that it's an institution of wizards that have laser swords, right? Like, and that reveal, I think, is really effective in the way that Luke simply isn't, because he is just presented as surface level, and it's much more declarative than a Yoda, where Yoda is actively deceiving both Luke and us, the audience, which I think that to me is maybe the missing component there that makes the Luke hermitage go a bit harder than it otherwise does, and maybe loses some of the impact.
Are you saying there's a lack of nuance in The Last Jedi?
Not even that. I'm saying there's a lack of deception from Luke, or a lack of performance from Luke to Rey, that I think.
No, I got you.
Yeah. I understand. I'm choosing not to engage with the joke. But yeah, I don't know, man. It just it's all I've been thinking about since I listened to that episode.
Ironically, there's more nuance there than came across. So like one thing, and I think we've talked about this before, I'm not sure, but there's the scene right before Yoda shows up where Luke grabs the torch and he's trying to go into the tree and burn up the Jedi texts, which theoretically, after he dies, if those texts are gone, then that's the entire history of the Jedi wiped out. There's nothing else. At least that's what we're supposed to think by that action, right?
Seems impossible for that to be true, but yes, like it just,
yeah. Because holocrons are all over the EU, but
they have central databases. But then it's like, well, how much of that was purged by the Empire? Like, yes, sorry, continue. It's insane.
Yeah,
to
I'm
me
not saying the idea has any.
I
don't think the idea has any credibility, but it's obviously there.
Yeah.
So, yes, Fitbit. I know I'm doing stuff. Apparently my pulse is up, and Fitbit's like, "Are you okay?"
You're like, "I'm fine. I'm just getting riled up about Last Jedi, baby. It's time to fight."
So when Luke goes to try to burn down the tree, he's wearing his ceremonial white robes, and when Rey first meets him, he's wearing the ceremonial white robes, which he then takes off after he tells her no and throws the thing away. And the canon reason is that every time he tries to destroy the Jedi text, he puts on his ceremonial robes. So he has been actively trying to do something. He has been consistently actively trying to destroy the Jedi and unable to bring himself to do so. So there is nuance there of him still being this sort of active hero that Rai described, even though it's also like a really cowardly version of it. But then they cut out any explanation, so no one would know that that was part of his story.
Is
So
that like novelization stuff? Feels like it might be.
it was, I don't know if it was in the novel or if it was just something that you know the filmmakers came out and said, hey, this is what we were thinking when we did it.
I mean, that works
no,
for me.
yeah, I do remember that they said like the reason he was wearing his ceremonial robes there at the cliff was he was about to kill himself or something.
Oh, awesome. That's even better.
No, it was because he had just come from a failed attempt. He had just had the torch with the books and he couldn't bring himself to do it. And so then he was sad standing over the cliff thinking, I couldn't burn the text. That's the only reason I'm here, is to get rid of the Jedi lineage, and I couldn't get rid of the text. So
what a failure.
Yeah, what a fucking loser. I would simply burn the text, boys. I don't know about you. I would simply be brave and do the thing. I wouldn't go through this ritual of putting on my robes. I'd just like turn up in my jeans and I'd just fucking do it. Something that I want to put into context with this is something that I think will resonate with Darth really strongly. Is in the Dark Knight Rises. Got the name of the film right? Fuck you. In the Dark Knight Rises, one of the we see a Bruce Wayne in a very similar position, alongside a Jim Gordon in a very similar position, where they both have this this thing that they could release into the world that would unburden them of this guilt in a very similar way that I think Luke is positioned in Lark Jedi, sure. In the way that Luke is positioned in that film, having these texts, and in the Dark Knight, it's kind of a instead of burning the past, it's acknowledging that the past is sort of built on this foundation of a lie, I guess. And in equal measure, those two things have an impact on this once great kind of figure, this once great hero, who then at the very last, minute has the opportunity to rebuild themselves and contribute again before fading away into Paris with Catwoman, which I'm pretty sure is what Luke does as well. Is he? Or is he doing something different? But I think they're playing with very similar ideas, and my suspicion is that one works more for Darth than the other. Or do you hate them both?
There was very little about that Batman film that I enjoyed.
It's crazy. This is insane to hear. What do you? It's so good.
Well, we had talked about it before that, because of our discussion, I actually now appreciate it a lot more, because you constantly referred to it as like a coda to the actual series, like it was a 2-movie series, and then this one is not a continuation; it is a 20 years later kind of thing.
Yes.
And from that mindset, I much more would appreciate it. Because like most of my arguments come from thinking about like this just happened at the end of the last movie, and now this has happened. So if you take those apart, then I have way fewer issues with it. Just if they had literally aged him 20 years or something, I would probably have adored it. Like older Batman, has to fight Bane, something like that.
They put
that could have been.
They kind of did.
Yeah, he's got some gray. All his cartilage is fucked up. It's just Christian Bale hasn't aged at all. It's the problem. Like, I think that genuine. Like, they did age him up a bit, right? But like, not enough.
Well, I think it's also because they just sort of threw that stuff in there in the middle of like him beating the crap out of people.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. There's a kind of instinct, I think, in postmodernism to want to build these things up, and then as you deconstruct them and break them down, look at how the disassemblage happens of these kind of heroes and these characters. I think in particular because, in sort of a post JFK world where it feels like the entire history is collapsing toward nothing, there's this kind of sense of like that to put Batman in conversation with the things it was playing with in the 80s, and in particular if you think about Star Wars and science fantasy and the kind of dying Earth trend in science fantasy, that obviously Star Wars is a big part of. at least the kind of core fantasy aspects of it, there is a sense in some way before this moment that, and it's not specifically JFK dying, but it is of that moment. There's a sense before that in culture that eventually everything will kind of become like a socialist paradise because that just seems like the natural evolution of humanity. And I think what postmodernism demonstrated, looking at the back of World War II and the Cold War, is like actually it really seems like maybe like where a history has happened and sort of history is ending over this great span of time. There isn't going to be this thing that everyone assumed was going to happen in modernism, which is everything would just eventually put itself right. We've talked before about Stephen King in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, this idea of like evil defeating itself, which is certainly present in Star Wars to a lesser extent, but certainly there in the original trilogy, which is that evil that is sufficiently charged will eventually devour itself, right? Evil has this like built-in self-destructive mechanism because greed will eventually topple and consume itself. And I think what postmodernism as a movement has recognized in now a kind of meta modern moment is it seems like that just isn't the case, and these fucking bad guys keep winning. And the corollary to that is, okay, well, if everything eventually decays in this way and eventually doesn't have this natural turn toward good, what does that mean for these once great figures? And that's why I think The Dark Knight Rises as a coda for me is really interesting, because it's about Bruce Wayne confronting, like, he fixed things, but he fixed things the wrong way. And so when those fixed things come undone, there will be a greater problem to face, which is not just a problem of legacy, but it's also a problem of like, what does being a hero look like now that we've created this this false peace, this false peacetime, which is what I think genuinely that's where a lot of postmodernism comes from, is this sense of like, we all know that the peace is a lie because we're, Bush Jr.'s starting wars all over the place, and so is every fucking president, and it's this peace built on a lie. And I certainly feel like The Dark Knight Rises is playing in that space far more than the sequel trilogy that has to contend with like, it's just another Death Star, like all that nonsense that ends up happening, or it's a million Star Destroyers or whatever the fuck that third film does. But I think it's all playing in the same
only
source.
10,000. Don't exaggerate.
It's only 10,000.
Only 10,000. Yeah.
That's a lot of ships. If you said it's only 10,000 cars, I'd be like, that is so many cars.
What was only 10,000?
In episode 9, the all the ships on the Death Planet that all had the Death Star cannon attached to them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I did.
Like the ones that can't go up.
Yeah. Fly up.
Do you think is the evolution? Are we gonna get the next trilogy and it's gonna be like Death Star like handguns?
So there's a video that I've been kicking around in my head for a while, and I think it might be fun if we did this, but essentially the idea is like there are a number of common takes on particular things, especially about the sequel trilogy, or primarily about the sequel trilogy that I've seen that either view it positively or negatively that I don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them from episode 9 is the whole idea of like it being ridiculous that like when he says like they can't go up, and that's a huge problem for people.
Can you remind me what the plot? Again, that film vaselined into my brain. It just like I saw it and then it.
So the main problem with Exegol is that, which is a multi-layered problem for a whole number of reasons, which I think we have talked about previously, but like or I think in one of our very first episodes we were talking about verisimilitude and like the what do they eat.
Yeah, I think it was the solo discussion.
Yeah, where they're like, there's thousands, there's tens of thousands of ships, and there's hundreds of thousands of people. Where do they all come from? How do they get here? What do they eat?
Yeah,
like,
dude.
how do they exist on this planet that's full of singularities and like lightning and stuff? And so the the MacGuffin in Episode 9 is that the Star Destroyers need a guidance beacon in order to leave the planet because of all the atmospheric disturbances and everything, that they don't know which way is up.
Okay.
Which seems like a ridiculous statement on the face of it, were you to take it literally, which I don't.
Mm-hmm.
So like when he says like they don't know which way is up, like that would be that is, I think, to me, always heard that as an exaggeration of it. It's really hard to maneuver without a fixed point to guide you.
Yeah, and they don't have like a effective compass mechanism for 3D space for these things. Like, well, that we probably talked about it in relation to Solo because of the Kessel Run. That's probably how it came up. Because the way that film frames the Kessel Run has a very similar kind of problem that is solved by Lando's girlfriend robot becoming the navigation system for the Millennium Falcon after freeing a bunch of robot slaves. But that is solved. It's established. It's set up. There's a reminder for it, and then there's a solution for it that comes at a price. I think the problem, is the problem that people have in the ninth film. Jesus. Is the problem that people have that is it literally the way that it's framed is like they can't go up, or is it the concept itself people have a problem with?
I think it's from all the stuff that I've seen. It's the literal idea, like there is only one solution. They only have this solution to it. That like one of the things that I've seen is that, like, well, you could have, like, if you're looking for like a fixed point in space to guide you out of the atmosphere, you would go up like a little bit, and then the next Star Destroyer would go up a little bit. Then the next one will go up a little bit, and the next one will go up a little bit,
Yeah.
and then
It's like
pretty soon
driving
you'll be able to make it.
Yeah, it's like driving in fog, as long as you can see the
but
person's headlights in front of you.
Exactly. So like, the point is, there would be a way to accomplish that, but like the parameters of the movie and the mission are the way they are because that's what the movie says. Like to me, I think this is done much better in A New Hope, where the pro sequel people will argue about, like, say, like the Death Star trench run, and it's like, well, why do they have to go down the trench? And the answer is because the guy said you have to go down the trench.
Yeah.
That's it. He said, in order to do this, we have to go down the trench. The end.
There's a concept.
That's all you need to. That is all you need to do in a movie or a story.
There's a concept that you talked about, I think, Rye, in it was one of, like, I think it might have even been the Acolyte, maybe, where I think it was around like the Force. Help me out, boys. What's the thing with the two become one become two?
Oh, that was Darth with the.
What's the It's not a
the
singularity.
one become two.
It's the
you're talking about this. You're talking about the
Virgins. The Virgins. Is that what it's called?
The Virgins.
Is the
Are
twins?
you talking about where the kids come from?
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
Okay.
You guys are looking at me
word.
like I'm fucking crazy. That was so rude. It is the Virgins, right?
Darth is looking at you. I'm looking at Darth.
I fucking come the fuck on. It's the.
Also, are you talking about a lightsaber that goes together? The two become one. Like, what are you trying to tell me?
That does also happen.
I thought he was talking about the Sith rule of two.
Good grief. Anyway, one of the problems that the Virgins presents is that it's such a non sequitur that the explanation of exactly what you just said, right, which is like, well, the guy said the thing. The Death Star trench run doesn't ring as weird or alarming because there's no additional context in the story that would suggest that there's a reason that might not be true, or there's a reason why that explanation might be insufficient, right? The easiest example is I can't believe I'm using this as an example. In the first Now You See Me film, there is never a point where someone goes, how did that person do that trick. Like, it's all just CG bullshit for the most part. They're not trying to even make it feel real. And even when they do explanations of stuff where they explain like the heist or whatever that they do live on stage, it's so ludicrous that you never stop down to be like, well, how did that work? With the one exception, which is where Merritt like looks at a truck driver, says nothing, and just like psychic chi blasts the guy unconscious. And it's at that moment where the film crosses some ineffable line for you as an audience member, where you suddenly go, okay, but everything else made sense in the context of everything else. This thing doesn't. And the divergence for me in that story, you can have the witch get into the kid's head and taunt him and make him wig out. You can do all that shit. And you can have her take over the Wookiee, and like all that stuff feels like it is of a piece with everything else. But then the story is like, yeah, and this Virgins thing was like, they did that on purpose. That like they engineered that somehow. And you go, okay, well that doesn't feel of a piece with everything else. Everything else kind of felt in the same mode, and that feels like that for some reason that feels like everything else is magic, and then you're like, but actually this person, they busted out an Excel spreadsheet, they planned their activity, and then they wrote a bunch of code that let them manipulate the magic. And you go, well, hang on, that doesn't feel that they feel different for some reason.
I don't think that's true. I think that that planet was the Virgins for whatever reason, and the witches' coven accidentally just ended up there. Because I think that it said that they were like running away from something.
I think that's
and
right,
they ended
yeah.
up. So they just accidentally discovered this and used that Virgins as a power source to create the twins.
Right, but even using it, right, I agree with that. My point though is like the using of it is the bit that like that just seems like it's so different than what the rest of that story is doing.
But like ironically, like part of what you just said, I think is the perfect explanation as to why the ships going up makes so little sense, because it doesn't hold true for everything else that's going on around them. All of the rebel ships that are there are able to leave the planet. They can fly up, but they can't. At the very beginning of the movie, Kylo goes there, and Kylo is able to leave the planet. He's able to fly up. If in that ending battle, not only could the Star Destroyers not fly up because it was too cloudy or whatever, but all of the rebels are also saying, where are we? There's too much debris, there's too much clouds, we can't see anything. If everyone had the same problem, not being able to get off the planet, then it makes total sense, and all of the complaining goes away. But because only the bad guys had the problem, and it was very obviously just to keep them fish in a barrel so they could all just be shot down without being able to escape, it was just so contrived that's why the audience is so fixated on how stupid it is. Give that problem to everyone like it should have been, and it's just natural now.
Do they not do that because they need the Star Wars finale thing of like the air battle and the land battle thing? That's like, because I
didn't. Well, I mean, they didn't do it because Abrams doesn't really think details.
I don't remember that film at all. I think that could have made for an Andor style. You know,
I have watched that end sequence so many times.
Just like his self-flagellation, or like for a reason.
Well, no, there were a couple different videos that I was going to make about different ideas that were happening there. That's one thing about The Rise of Skywalker, or is that I have watched in its entirety from start to finish The Force Awakens a bunch of times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many times, but a bunch of times. And I've watched different sections a lot, but I've watched it from beginning to end more than once.
Yeah, it's a
The
very,
Last Jedi,
say what you will, very watchable film.
Yes. I would also say the same thing about The Last Jedi. I have watched The Last Jedi from start to finish many times.
It's too woke for me, unfortunately. So I actually
yeah.
It actually I can't. It's too woke. So I actually go on Reddit instead.
David the woke police.
That's me.
So Rise of Skywalker I have seen once, maybe twice.
Yeah, dude.
In from start to finish, I think twice is it. And the problem is that there is, and I will tell you is, you remember one of my things with movies is and TV shows is the beginning of things. And at the beginning of Rise of Skywalker, we get to the part where they're fighting in on the jungle planet after getting back, and Chewie's like "Rrr," in the background because the Millennium Falcon's on fire, and they're bickering in a way that is supposed to be like they're friendly bickering and they're friends and all that stuff like that. And it just occurs to me that I don't care about these people, and that's where the movie loses me.
Can I just say very good Wookiee off the cuff right then? I just want to acknowledge that. In the comments, please let Ryan know how good of a Wookiee that was, or actually give it a Wookiee rating. You know what I'm saying? Like, because I reckon there's got to be some core audience member of ours that like has a Wookiee on lock, and they can just rock up to a party and like they can just do a Wookiee. And I want to know if that is better, because let me tell you, the Obi-Wan scale in this company, quite high. Okay, the Obi-Wan range, quite high. The Wookiee range, average, pretty low. My Wookiee's dog shit. Patrick doesn't have a Wookiee, okay? I imagine Darth doesn't either. But Rybold apparently pitch perfect Wookiees. I want to know what the what everyone's Wookiee scale is, and if you think you're a better Wookiee than Rybold. Obviously I don't have a Wookiee because they're dogs, man. I don't fuck with animals.
Because it's too woke.
It's too it's so woke, man. All these female Wookiees, are you kidding me? What's wrong with being a man Wookiee? Okay, a thing that's interesting to me is it's not just that that film's opening struggles, I think, to recontextualize the story and kind of start in a sensible and logical place. I think it's that when it does try to set up its key stakes, it's so complicated. Like the premise of that film and the problems they have to solve are the main event that happens, that like the inciting incident of the film happens in fucking Fortnite. We start after the thing that the film should start with. We need to establish what is happening.
I did not know about that going into the movie theater. I was like, what?
I came out of it and I think my old co-host turned to me and she goes, "Did you know that I was like, when the fuck did the what? Did I miss that? Was that in Last Jedi?" She goes, No, that was a Fortnite event. Well, you know what? You didn't log on that day. It's like, fucking hell. But that what the film needed to do was establish the current state of the world, and they could have just moved the world forward a bunch more than they did. Establish the current state of the world, show us the current play for these characters and what they're all up to. Don't make it a direct continuation. Move a bunch of pieces around to sort whatever it is that you need, and then start the film with how does this thing that happens, which would have been dope to see on screen, right? Everybody, and whether it's literal, people hear it in their dreams or whatever, everyone hears the voice of this fucking dead emperor. That kickstarts the plot, and then that becomes the driving factor. Instead of, that's already happened, and we need to find things to push these characters toward that never quite feel organic. And it's not just that it's off screen, because I don't mind that happens before the film starts, but to then choose to do nothing with the fact that it happens off screen is such an unforced error to me.
Not to defend it also, but in one, actually I think it was the very first trailer that came out, it ends like it cuts to black and then you hear Palpatine laugh. So like everyone knew that he was coming back before the whole Fortnite thing even happened. That was just like, that was the actual text that said what was happening.
But the trailer is not text.
Did not see any trailers before Rise of Skywalker. So I took a note from my then Star Wars buddy, who is, because of the sequels, no longer my Star Wars buddy. He's
Hell
just
yeah.
a guy that I know.
He's just
doesn't
a fella.
care about Star Wars anymore.
Us too. Turns out.
Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, we're talking about the Acolyte, and he's like, meh.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, that's fair.
He thought it was Book of Boba Fett killed him. I was like, was it the trains?
I like the train sequence. I guess just I'd circle back.
Do you remember that from the Jedi Fallen Order thing?
Yeah,
I talked a
forgot
lot about trains.
I was so drunk, but I had forgotten about that.
the trains. Yeah.
I need to chop that up into some shorts because like the look on your face when you're like trains is a thing as like or is as an issue for people in Star Wars.
It
But
drives
that was
me
in
crazy.
Solo too.
Yeah,
We talked about trains a lot in Solo.
We have to do a entire discussion about trains in Star Wars because we could talk about that for like 4 hours. That's like
The other big one is boats.
I beg your unbelievable pardon? What do you
Boats
mean?
in Star Wars.
What's as in people don't like them?
No, as in people are excited when they see boats in Star Wars.
What the fuck? What?
Think about it. How often have you seen a boat in Star Wars?
Yeah, because they have ships that fly.
Right? So why would you have trains?
No, because trains are
Touche.
we have planes now and we still have trains. Okay?
Checkmate, atheists.
We have planes and we have boats now. Fuck me. It truly there is a mind that I cannot access. There is a type of person who is so alien to me that you know when like you read something on Reddit, which you should never do. Don't be on Reddit. Don't be reading Reddit. And don't worry, it's no longer indexed by Google, so you won't be finding it in Google's now terrible Google search. But it's like when you read a comment on Reddit and it's so it reads like it was written by someone who is sitting in a room and someone has explained to someone else who is now explaining to them something about the nature of reality or the world, and they're responding to that with no context but this like second third hand account of something, and you read it and you're like, there's nowhere to start here. We can't start because this is just so foreign to me. That to me, being excited about boats in Star Wars, crazy to me. Being excited about laser swords, understandable. Being excited about Anakin Skywalker, understandable. Hayden Christensen, hottie, I get it. But like, boats? Y'all trying to tell me about boats? That's crazy to me. That's crazy. I don't need Star Wars boat discourse, but now that I know it exists, we're gonna have to talk about boats at some point. Because that's an exciting wormhole to me. Just 4-hour discussion, boats and Star Wars. An episode for nobody. Episode 4, just one guy on Reddit. That's interesting though. One of the things that for a lot of the materialism stuff I've been reading for my masters, a lot of the ways that people talk about infrastructure. So like we don't really often think about transportation as infrastructure, but it is a type of infrastructure. And in particular, the ways that different mechanisms enable or prevent that use of that technology, and who has access to that and things like that. One of the things about trains that's particularly interesting is that trains are like this ultimate economic leveler where they're fairly cheap to actually run, like literally like fuel-wise. They're not that expensive to build in comparison to other types of infrastructure, and they last a heck of a long time once you build the infrastructure to, sustain them. Obviously, problems notwithstanding with how much train track in the world was laid by slaves, but problems notwithstanding from a purely like technological determinism perspective, trains are a really unique artifact that allow you to move great amounts of goods, people, services, money, great distances fairly quickly for not a heck of a lot of money and not a heck of a lot of resources that obviously disrupt the natural environments that they're placed within. But for a world like Star Wars, I think the most interesting implementations of technological determinism for me are where we see that kind of infrastructure contended with properly, right? And Solo, I think, is almost there with its train, right? Where like that train sequence, they go, okay, well, it's a mine. How are they getting the stuff they've mined to the spaceport where they need to then get the stuff out of there quickly, safely, reliably every single time? The answer seems to be SkyTrain, which I saw the Simpsons monorail episode. I get it. But that is more interesting to me than boats, because boats don't have the same level of required material investment. They just require water and a determination to build a boat. Now that's different than like freight shipping and things like that, which I think are of a very similar piece. We have to build trade lanes and stuff like that. But that to me is why trains are more interesting in Star Wars than boats. I don't know why I felt the need to explain that, but here we are. It's because you brought up fucking boats.
It was 10 minutes about trains and boats.
That's your fault, dude. That's on you, man. You got to. I take no responsibility or accountability for that. That's entirely Rye's fault.
Like I said at the time, I feel very strongly about trains in Star Wars.
Let us know in the comments. What do you want to hear the boys talk about more? Trains or boats in Star Wars? I'm going to put a poll up on YouTube. Okay,
well, the answer is obviously going to be trains.
Darth is going to put a poll up on his YouTube channel, and he's going to get his 10,000 subscribers to tell us, do they want us to talk about trains or boats next in Star Wars? Or some third
Planes are superior
transportation mechanism. You know?
What would it? What else would it be?
Speeders, speed bikes, motorcycle.
Oh, they got those.
Motorcycles.
Oh God, the moped gang.
We could talk about the moped.
You forgot about the moped gang?
No one would watch that, unfortunately. What else is there in Star Wars?
What's the Elon Musk tunnel? The hyper underground tunnel.
The boring stuff.
They could have that.
The thing that doesn't work. Yeah, they could have that.
Yeah. I mean that. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that famously doesn't work. Yeah, he built a big tunnel, and he was like, "What we'll do is we'll build this tunnel." I can't do his accent. South African accent's really hard. He goes, "I'm gonna build this tunnel, and it's gonna be funny because we're gonna call the company the Boring Company. Get it? Because they're boring a hole. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna build a tunnel, and then we're gonna have transportation in that tunnel. The transportation's gonna be so quick that you'll be able to transverse these distances so quickly, and none of it works. It's because everything Elon Musk does is terrible, and because he's a fucking idiot. But what's quite interesting to me about Star Wars in that regard specifically is that Phantom Menace, that sequence where they go through the planet's core or whatever, that is like, remind me, is that a shortcut, or are they doing that because the planet's being like, this is where I think the infrastructure becomes interesting, because that's obviously like natural infrastructure for the Gungans or whatever, but that's very tunnel coded to me. I think that's the only instance I can think of where it feels like a tunnel. Even though I understand that it's underwater, but like, you know what I'm saying? It's tunnel coded.
There have been a lot of unique phrases that have come out of this recording session.
This is why we pre-produce things normally, because this is just, I'm losing my mind.
We started this talking about Yoda.
Am I wrong? Is it not tunnel coded?
What do you mean tunnel coded?
What do you mean? What do I mean? It does them going through the. Why am I getting animated about this? It's a but like, okay, isn't that what a tunnel is?
Not necessarily.
No, I think the whole point of doing that is to set up the Gungan encounter later, right? To show that there's this whole underwater section of.
No, that's after the Gungan section.
It's after. They get the ship from the Gungans. That's when they kidnap Jar Jar.
Oh, you're right, yeah.
Kidnap
so it's just, either way, it's just a
I just don't think Jar Jar can give consent.
The thing about that whole section, which I think is interesting, is that there's a lot of people, or there were at the time of, I think it was Rise of Skywalker, where there's a whole lot of actions or decisions that people make based on the camera's like a feeling, you know, and and that's the Force, right? So if you go watch that section of the Phantom Menace, the whole thing is Obi-Wan going which way, and Qui-Gon going. Yeah, the Force tells me it's that way.
Right.
And they brought Jar Jar to navigate through the core. That was literally why they took him.
Then they realized he was a dipshit, and he does. Well, to be fair and balanced, which we apparently have to be, Jar Jar does tell them about the fish that are trying to kill them. He kind of gives them like a bit of lore as they go. But yeah, he doesn't do the one job he's supposed to. Because, I mean, when does he?
I mean, otherwise they wouldn't have known there were fish in the ocean.
it's
Can we
such
talk
a
about the Ben
point.
Hur sequence
Talk about the
of
what?
Phantom Menace? The Ben Hur sequence.
That's my
of Phantom Menace?
sarcasm sign. I don't know if you could read it.
Yeah, that's. I'll punch in on the edit. Don't worry. We
So
anytime one of us is
for
sarcastic, full screen. It's gonna be half the shit I say. You won't see anything but just this piece of paper.
for Phantom Menace, were you familiar with Ben Hur prior to seeing?
No, I was not. I am now, but I was not when I first saw it.
Okay, so I was raised. My house was very. I don't know what the word is. Well, first of all, I was overseas back at a time when pre-internet, when we were not connected by. Uh, I was not connected with any sort of like U.S. culture at the time where I was. Uh, my uncle used to like record TV or US TV, and he would ship us, or like on VHS, he would ship us boxes of tapes. And we would get, it would be like, it was like we were in the army, and it's like, hey, we got our 3 months supply of American TV from
Mhm.
the whatever shows my uncle chose. Um, he sent a lot of weird shit, but he had some pretty good taste as well.
Mhm.
But anyway, point being, there was not a lot of I did not come up with a lot of modern movies. Like most of the 80s I missed. Goonies, never seen. Um, any of the, was it the Brat Pack movies? What you call that? Like the candles, and
Yes.
this might be too old for you
This
guys.
this is like I mean, Brat Pack is way before my time, but yes, I know what you're talking about. That's like,
All right.
yeah,
Okay. So, but I mean, I was alive at that time.
I understand that.
Uh,
We weren't
now
far off. It's
one.
just that wasn't part of the conscious. Also, I live in Australia. Like, culture at that time took 30 years to get to us.
No, that was one of the things I always used to tell people, is that like everywhere you go in the world, it's like the culture that, or the most pervasive bits of, or the two most pervasive things of American culture are McDonald's
Hmm.
and Michael Jackson. Is
Okay, yeah.
we did a, when I was a kid, we did a camp out with these Palestinian Boy Scouts from Gaza, and pretty much the only thing we had in common to talk about was Michael Jackson. And this was like the mid '90s or something like that.
Hmm.
But like,
Hmm.
anyways, so I was raised on exclusively like old movies, with the exception of Top Gun, which my mom recut. Her version of Top Gun is incredible, and I wish I could find it for posterity. She cut out all of the romance. It
Oh.
is a non-stop action-packed thrill ride that is an hour long. It is, you have the beginning where the guy, was it not Merlin, but the other dude like freaks out and he gives him the finger upside down,
Hmm.
and then you have them at Top Gun, and then Goose dies. Then they go on the mission. Maverick's the hero, and then he's at a bar and he puts the coin in the thing, and this girl shows up, which made total sense to me at the time, because my only other context for how a movie goes was John Wayne, where John Wayne goes off and does something and then gets the girl at the end.
Yeah. It's very James
So
Bond style. Like,
yeah.
yeah, it's
So
of the
like
moment. Yeah.
structurally, it completely worked.
That is
for me.
fascinating. Have you noticed, and this is just this, I don't know if this is just me, but like, I think something weird has happened with Tom Cruise. Obviously, just as a person, something weird has happened with Tom Cruise, but specifically, he doesn't kiss people in films anymore. And I feel like Top Gun, that era is after that, he's just like, I'm not kissing women in film.
Night and day.
Do you think that's a loss? It
That's
might
the-
be.
Um,
That might be the last time. It's just weird.
That-
He just stopped.
that
I
was
don't know.
what, 10 years ago? That was more than 10 years.
Yeah. It was like 2004.
Maybe he started.
Right?
He might have
No, it
started
was
feeling
after
silly
that.
standing on the apple boxes so he could get tall enough.
Got him.
So no, Night and Day was right around the peak of Top Gear before Clarkson got kicked out.
God,
2 or 3
so
seasons before he got
20.
kicked out.
I don't know when that was. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. There's no way for us to look it
2013,
up.
2014.
Yeah.
something like
Something like that. But yeah, that's just interesting to me. I find that stuff. I find the meta, like paratextual decisions that certain actors make, like that, fascinating.
Well, he's also old.
He's like, yeah, I know he's like, well, he's 60, but like, I don't know what he's doing, but that he's gonna live forever. That man, he's filling
Well,
himself with
that's the Scientology.
yeah, his virgin blood and plasma and all kinds of shit. Like, who knows what they're doing, man? But yeah,
Anyway, the
he's
point of what I was talking about originally was I was raised on exclusively old movies, one of which was Ben-Hur.
mhm.
So when I saw that in the theater, I immediately was like, "Oh, this is Ben-Hur. This was an homage to Ben-Hur," and I loved every second of it.
Interesting. Because to me,
Now the other thing I will say is that like Ben-Hur is like it took a year for them to shoot that sequence of Ben-Hur. And it's like a good, I want to say 20 or 30 something minutes of the film is that chariot race. Um, and it's like a 3 hour something movie, but a good chunk of it is just the race. It took them a year to film, I think, and then at least one person died in the making of it.
I'm sure a lot of horses
Um,
did as well, for sure.
oh yeah, but but yeah, like that sequence in the Phantom Menace is not short, right?
It's pretty long. It's deceptively long because they do a lot of cutaways to like audience reactions and things like that that are like retimed. It's a long part of like it's a big part of the film. And it in some ways I think it is one of the more interesting demonstrations of a thing that Lucas can do that not a lot of directors have found success in, which is take this thing that someone else has done, recontextualize it, repackage it, and have it at once feel like a reference and an homage and its own thing entirely. Like when you look at it, when you look at those side by side, I'm sure someone's done this video essay. Um, there are a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of like Lucasisms in there. And I think a lot of other directors end up in this position where they either end up recreating the thing and referencing it directly. Think about how many action films have a corridor fight now because of Daredevil. A Wanna like that, and the ways that like that has lineage back to Kung Fu Wushu films and things like that. But in the ways that like the Western reimagining of it, copying Daredevil, it just feels like you're watching a scene from Daredevil that isn't done as well, versus the Ben-Hur, the pod race sequence, which feels like its own thing somehow. And I'm sure there's a close study to be done of like what makes it feel different.
No, I think you're absolutely right because like I said, immediately I go, oh, this is Ben-Hur, but it's cool. It stands on its own. The opposite of that, I think, or that done, or an example of that done poorly, which I think is what you were alluding to, is the on your left at the end of Rise of Skywalker. So
You're gonna have to remind me
know,
because again, I don't remember any of that
all right.
film.
So Avengers Endgame is you have Captain America. He's about to face off against Thanos and his army all by himself. Like, tightens the shield or whatever, and just great determination. And then like the microphone in his ear like rattles to life and goes, hey Cap, on your left. And then then everybody else shows up that's been brought back.
Awesome.
And then he goes, Avengers Assemble, and it's amazing. So that same thing happens in the Rise of Skywalker differently. This was one of the scripts that I wrote that I never got around to finishing, but like why it's exactly the same thing but it doesn't work. But Poe is like we're screwed, we failed, we're all gonna die and everything like that. And then Lando says, what does he say? He's like, there are more of us or something like that. And then
is that a reference?
The whole galaxy. So I
think
like
in Star Wars. I mean, like in universe.
No, it's only in that movie. That there are more of us. That there are more of us good people out there, etc.
Okay. Right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, so he's like, yeah, there's Lando. So Poe's despondent that they failed and everything, and uh, then he goes like, and then Lando goes essentially on your left, and etc. Now,
Right.
a big part of why I think that moment doesn't work is that you have Captain America being the hero who, in the face of adversity and certain defeat, does not give up. Just as like, tightens the shield. I'm gonna do this, or I'm gonna go down swinging, whatever. Um, and then he's rescued from the on your left. Whereas Poe is like, we're all gonna die. And it's like, I'm sorry, I failed you. Oh
I
God,
fucked up again.
yeah, and I never should have. I'm a total failure. And then Lando goes, no, we're here to save you.
Yeah.
So to me,
but he did
it
still
doesn't
fuck
work
up
then.
though. He did still fuck. This is the thing about Poe Dameron is like, he made the same mistake he made in the previous film again, and it just so happens that someone else is here to fix it again. Fucking loser. Yes, that's so funny. But it's again that thing of like, it's taking something you recognize and trying to redo it in like a meaningful and useful way, and trying to it's that common saying in art, which is like, good artists copy, great artists steal. But it's about like how you take that thing that you've stolen and reimagine it, recontextualize it, make it surprising, and make it fit the thing you're doing, right? Denis Villeneuve is like the ultimate king of this, where there are entire shots in Blade Runner 2049, for example, that take something that was in the original Blade Runner, or something that was in Star Wars, or something that was in Lawrence of Arabia, and it goes, what if that, but I just like I turned the dial past 10 to like 15 and completely remixed this into something organic and exciting and new, but it feels of a piece with this era and these roots and these conversations. And I think where some of the Rise of Skywalker stuff doesn't work in trying to remix the same kinds of things that the Obi-Wan, Hermit remix, the Yoda Hermit remix, the Luke, Hermit remix, I think part of what ends up becoming difficult about this contemporary moment of the Disney vehicle is that instead of taking that stuff and going, let me steal something and reinvent it, and let me throw in a Ben-Hur, and let me throw in this other influence I have, it seems like the only things that they want to throw in and remix are references to the existing material of the thing, right? Like, it's not just that it's an on your left scene. It's that on your left scene is also a Disney thing, right? We don't want any cross-contamination. All of our stuff is intertext with itself, and at a certain point you start to run out of things to reference, and so you remake the Obi-Wan Hermit as Luke, but then you confuse it by then also having Yoda's ghost be there, and Yoda was also a hermit, and it just like ends up in this like weird like ricochet that ends up with a sequence like that with Poe Dameron and the on your left thing that doesn't feel earned, but also doesn't feel interesting or unique or motivated, because it's just pinging off something that already exists without any particular vector. It's like, instead of the Villeneuve thing, which is like, let me take it and like run in this direction as hard as I can, it's like, we're just gonna hold all this shit in our arms and show it to you, and this is what you want. This is good. This is film now. Star Wars, yes. Like, and it feels like that moment lacks the urgency and the motivation and the inventiveness that it could otherwise have, that could have that moment feel like it's finally happening, and it's just nothing. It ends up standing for nothing, trying to say nothing, and moving in no particular direction other than sort of limping forward because it's the thing that's supposed to happen. And that to me is, I think, emblematic of the problems that end up kind of infesting, the kind of Disney vehicle and the franchiseification of Star Wars in general, with the notable exception, of course, of Andor and some of Acolyte. And I think Sam said it really well in that recording, which is like, there's a real challenge doing these exciting, bold things within this larger vehicle because they don't want to piss anybody off. They don't want to upset anybody, and they want to have things be accessible to the most amount of people so that they can sell the most amount of tickets because everything has to make $1 billion now because they did it once, right? And that kind of chokehold that it puts on the material pressure that places on the company and the company places on itself ends up defeating creativity more often than it ends up producing creativity.
That what you said right there, where he was talking about the difficulty of doing or the difficulty of doing stuff without pissing people, or doing something new without pissing people off within a franchise or existing story. I actually had to go back and I had to rewind that part because that set me off on this whole thing about um, different shows that I've disconnected from on purpose because of things that happen to characters that I really liked or cared about. There was Walking Dead, and and I should say, like, I was thinking, I had to rewind because I got totally lost in the thought of, like, did that happen because what they did was was bad, or it's just I didn't like because there was a different theory that I saw on what, particularly The Walking Dead, like what are the things that they did wrong with characters, but or was it just because I didn't like what happened to the character? Like, to give you an idea of like what this idea was for The Walking Dead is that the and it goes back to like what a hero does, which is what we want our main characters to do, is that when when the actions that they are taking are to fight something, or to evade, or to fight something, or oppose something, or they're blocked here but they redirect and they go another way, or all kinds of heroic stuff, is most of it's based in activity, right? um and trying to move things in a particular way, but according to this idea is that when when your characters are when you punish your characters to the extent that all they are doing is seeking to avoid punishment, then you've gone too far. um and and I forget what the rest of that is, but like, that was a really interesting idea to me. But in The Walking Dead, there was a particular moment where one of the characters like gets like disappeared or kidnapped, and I don't remember what happened to them because that was the end of the show for me. I was like, I'm done. I don't
I
want to see. I don't want
think
to find out.
you're probably talking about when Daryl gets kidnapped by Negan, right? Or is it before that?
No, I think this was before. I never saw Negan. This is before Negan.
So that was
Um,
probably. There's only one other major kidnapping, which is Beth, I think, gets kidnapped. Um,
I'm pretty sure it was Beth.
yeah.
And then in Downton Abbey, when you've seen Downton Abbey?
Yeah, yeah. Not
Yeah.
all the way to the
So
end, but I've seen
when
most of it.
okay, well, so one of the characters gets raped in so I forget what season it was, and that was the end of the show for Va, actually, because we were watching that together, and that was it. She was like, "Nope, I'm out. I'm done."
Interesting.
And I felt the same way. I eventually went back and like watched everything, including the movies. but
Ugh,
uh,
not good.
yeah, yeah. The stakes have never been so low. But like
yeah. Mm-hmm.
but yeah, no, I totally get that. Is like the uh what was done to the character was so, and this is different than the character behaving in a way that in a way other than we would expect. And like Darth was saying, not having seen what got them to be that way. Um But this was like something that happened to the character that was so distressing that we were like, no, I'm not going to engage with this anymore.
I think part of that is when that is that if that is something that the story is going to do, it has to lay that out as the stakes of the story. I think the problem becomes when that happens in a story that isn't centrally focused on that as an idea, right? I'm thinking specifically of, and it's just contemporary to my moment here because I've been rereading Berserk. I've been thinking a lot about Dark Souls and things like that. And the lineage of Berserk is the idea that you can write an entire story about suffering and pain as long as you center that and you communicate to your audience out the gate. This is what this story is going to be about. It's about characters receiving and inflicting tremendous amounts of pain and suffering on each other. And that is Dark Souls as a franchise, right? That's of a piece with that. But those stories identify that as they advertise that to you going in. And The Walking Dead is interesting because it has to walk this balancing act where early on it has to be about survival against these tremendous odds. But then eventually it has to become this other thing where it's like, okay, well, now that we're surviving, how can we make these characters suffer even further? And that ends up with the complications of Negan and the way that ends up playing out. But yeah, 100%. Like, I think unless the story beds that down as its central theme and lets you know, hey, this is what we're doing, unless you're here for that, yeah, it's a great example and a really good demonstration of like when people switch off. Because if the story's not about that and hasn't done its best to communicate that, yeah, it's just like, well, why am I? This is just miserable. Like, what are we doing? What's the point of this? And like spoilers, but like Beth doesn't come out the other side of that. She's not a continuing character. Like,
yeah,
and it's used specifically to bring Noah into the story, who, spoilers, doesn't last the next season. So it just ends up like kind of being trauma for Maggie, and that's it. And that to me is like a really poorly thought through and executed idea, especially given how much groundwork they do with Beth and Daryl in the wake of the farm, where they're sort of bonding together and have their own entire episode working together. Yeah, it just ends up being this thing that is like incredibly traumatizing that ends up really contributing very little except to be traumatizing and grim. And I think that is one of The Walking Dead's greatest challenges tonally, is how do you sustain a piece of television that necessarily demands this level of periodic darkness and suffering without it just becoming dreary and disengaging. And I suspect that's part of the thing that Darth always talks about with these heroes who are over the hill or broken or whatever the terminology is that we want to particularly use. I think part of that is like sometimes it just sucks to watch a thing like that. And that's why for me Ted Lasso is such a breath of fresh air. Because like, yeah, as you get into the show, there is a lot of underlying things that these characters are working through. But like fundamentally, it's a show about people like trying to support each other and do right by each other. And it's fun and it's funny and it's interested in being lively, even if it does have these darker elements that work in as it goes on. But yeah, it just gets exhausting, especially when increasingly it feels like real life is pretty dark and pretty scary, especially lately. I think it's of no surprise to me that is a mechanism that makes people go, I'm out, I'm good, I'm fine, actually, I'm good. That is kind of interesting, and probably pertinent to the Luke of it all as well.
So, what I would like to do right now is, if we could take a 2-minute break.
Yeah, well, we can take a quick break, and then we might try and wrap up so Darth can go to bed.
Well, what I was gonna say is like if we take a 2-minute break, the original thing that I think we were started talking about, that I think it would be good if Darth were to repeat his thoughts on it, was the whole idea of like we didn't get to see Luke become the way that or the problem of we didn't get to see how Luke got to be that way. Remember that?
Okay, so 2-minute break, and then we'll come back, okay? If you like these handcrafted studies of genre fiction, please head over to zeroindent.com or patreon.com/zeroindent if you'd like to consider supporting us. Even if you just give us a follow on Patreon, that helps us out. Leave a comment, a like, and if you're in a financial position to do so, you can support us and get access to early content, additional videos, director's commentaries, audio diaries, and all kinds of different things we have coming up. It really makes a difference helping keep independent media crit alive. Once again, that is zeroindent.com or patreon.com/zeroindent if you'd like to support us.
Darth, the initial topic before we got diverted into Top Gun, and The Walking Dead, was about your recording with Sam, where you had talked about the idea of maybe Luke didn't. I think it was, if I'm paraphrasing this correctly, something to the effect of you thinking that Luke doesn't work in The Last Jedi because we didn't get to see how he got to be that way. Am I
That
remembering that correctly?
is, yeah. So that's a statement that I've made in multiple videos, and I think that it works for a lot of different. That problem exists for a lot of different characters, not just Luke. He's just maybe the most egregious because he has the biggest shift. But the Batman was another one that I said that I hate the transition between Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises because the character change is so drastic between the films. I brought up the Hunger Games as another one. Although some people had been correcting me.
What's the example in the Hunger Games?
At least from what so granted, this is my memory. I could be completely wrong, and based on what people were telling me, I could be. It's very likely that I'm completely wrong, but from my memory, she ends the second movie, like she shoots the arrow through the thing and it blows up the thing, and then they go and find the hidden District 13 that they didn't know exist, and she's like the triumphant hero, and she just saved everything. The next movie starts, and it like starts on her like having a breakdown and just like bawling her eyes out. And there's no transition between those two things.
The books are even worse, where that whole first act is her thinking about killing herself.
But so if we had seen that, and if we had seen Luke, same thing with Han. He goes from I'm going to take this Tauntaun out into the snow and probably die because my friend Luke is out there. He goes from that to before episode 7, Leia, goodbye. Our son turned evil, so I'm never going to talk to you again. Like, there is so much that happens with these characters that because we didn't see it, not only can we not understand their mentality for, like, we can infer so much. Like, I understand why Han had to leave Leia but that doesn't mean that there's a difference in understanding and empathizing, I guess. Because I didn't see it, I didn't experience it with them, therefore I cannot empathize with them, even though I understand the reason was his heartbreak from losing their son in that fashion. I understand from Luke's perspective that he lost all of his students in that fashion, and how he would be heartbroken enough to go and do what happened, but I can't empathize with it because I didn't experience it.
Interesting. I will make a pedantic point, which is that you're talking about sympathizing. You're saying you can empathize with them, but you can't sympathize with them. Just because I know if I don't say that, someone in the fucking comments will write that. But yes, I understand completely. I think
to be fair, you wouldn't be you if you didn't say that. So
it'd be me in the comments. Is what the case would be.
For the person that doesn't understand the difference, could you explain the difference?
Yeah, so empathizing is being able to explain someone's point of view and feelings, and sympathize is feeling those feelings for and with that person. So you can empathize with something, which is to understand how someone got there or how someone feels about something, but you have to empathize with someone to then sympathize with them. So an example might be if somebody tells you that they had a really shitty, this is a really lame example, but whatever, they had a really shitty week, and you are able to understand that and help engage with them, talk them through, help unpack it. That is different than if someone tells you that they are having a shitty week. You if you were to sympathize with that, you would feel similar feelings to what they're feeling. A really good example that actually happened recently was someone at work was explaining that their dog had heat stroke or something, and they were telling the story about how they went to the vet, hospital, and all this stuff. And one person on the Zoom call, was getting visibly upset as the story went on because she was sympathizing because she was also like a pet animal person, whereas I was sort of empathizing because I understood, but I didn't then necessarily feel those same feelings. So that's probably the difference.
You don't have a soul.
Because I don't feel. I'm an uncaring. I'm an uncaring word machine.
Just a black piece of coal right there.
Yeah, I've got the Dark Souls dark sign where I should have a heart. Yeah, I too have been touched by the curse. Yes, that is the difference. But I completely understand what you're saying, Darth, which I think, especially for a character that you have a lot of investment in, I think that can be a really challenging and arresting problem to contend with. And I think Sam, to his credit, like, did such a beautiful job of articulating the artistic value of that and then putting that in context with the challenge it presents to like us as audience members as well.
I know, and I don't know how that made you feel when, Sam and I finished our conversation, and I'm like, "You made me appreciate The Last Jedi." David never did that.
Yeah, I never tried. We
All right,
one day.
I'm definitely gonna have to finish this.
It ends it with Darth having almost completely reversed his position, and I think that's proof of two things. One, no one fucking listens to me. Okay, that's thing one, which we all know, as evidenced by us recording this now instead of recording the thing we were supposed to be recording. Thing number two is that
Look at this guy.
Look at this fucking guy down here. The second thing it demonstrates, I think, is there are ways to react to something emotionally in a text or in general. And then there are ways that you can engage with other people to unpack those things and try and understand why you felt that way, and then maybe recontextualize your understanding of that thing through media criticism. And I think it's a really deft demonstration of the value of the kinds of things that we talk about and the way that we approach things and the way that we produce things, because that's not a place that you get to without being open to that process. And I think it behooves us to remind people that it takes quite a lot of bravery, even if we don't think of it in those terms, and courage and empathy and humility to put yourself in a position to be open to those conversations. And so many people aren't with this stuff, and in particular with Star Wars. Duh. But the other thing that it calls into mind is, I wonder, like, I was trying to think about this. I was like, is there an example for myself? Because you asked me this question in our chat the other day, Darth, of like, is there an example where a character changed off screen and it didn't work for me? And I was really struggling, so I was like, my brain just doesn't, like, work that way. And I think the corollary for me is when in a story that I'm experiencing, is when a character ends up in a place that doesn't feel earned for them in that story. That's probably the version of that for me. It's sort of it's like the flip of that, where
that is the acolyte writ large.
Correct, right? Yes, 100%. That's exactly fucking right. The other example that I've been reading, speaking of Hunger Games, I've been reading a bunch of contemporary dystopian fiction that was coming out at the same time as research for my master's, and I've been reading the Red Rising series, and that just takes this character of Darrow, and the first, second, and third books move him into places at the end of those books that just, like, it just doesn't work for the story it's in. Like, the ideas are there, but it feels like, well, this is what happened in Maze Runner, or this is what happened in Ender's Game, and so that's what happens here, and like it never quite feels like it lands and clicks into place in the stories that it's in. And I think that's a similar kind of thing for me in that third Hunger Games book and the movie as well, or the movies, I guess, because they made two of those, didn't they? That was a real moment in time, wasn't it, fellas? When they were like, we've got to finish a franchise. We don't want to do a 3.5 hour film. What if we did 2.5 hour films that we added a bunch of filler to? That's a good idea. So thanks, Harry Potter. The the other thing that does to me, I think, across the lifetime of a franchise, in particular, I'm thinking like the difference between like the types of stories that get executed in like the early Assassin's Creed and then the kind of the middle Assassin's Creed with Ezio is you end up having to push these characters into positions that feel distorted sometimes. And where they feel distorted, I think, is ultimately for me a symptom of, well, the journey to get there didn't feel like it made sense. It didn't feel like it was earned. It didn't feel like it was contiguous to the thematic elements. It didn't feel like it was realistic for that character. And that's very different than I don't like that outcome for that character, right? Those are sort of two very different things for me that I want to try and meaningfully separate. It's not that I don't like where they land, it's that it doesn't feel like where they land made sense or was earned or had thematic resonance to me. That's very different than I don't like that Luke is sad.
It's
So
literally
what-
what Rye said like 30 minutes ago, was that it was hard to differentiate between whether he didn't like what they did to the characters that made him stop watching the show versus what happened was bad writing, and like how to differentiate those two.
What is there? Was there something specific that Sam said that got or I'm assuming it was probably more than one thing, um, that made you think differently about the Last Jedi?
The probably the single thing, which ironically David also just said there, was pointing out that all of the stuff that Luke said that was wrong, and I was always just like, Johnson doesn't know Star Wars. He's literally getting facts wrong, and that's like theoretically, assuming that Johnson knew what he was doing. Um, that was me not giving him enough credit because he was literally having Luke say incorrect facts because Luke is supposed to be wrong in this instance. But if you don't trust the director, and you don't trust that what is happening is, is canonically correct, then you don't give Luke enough credit. And so when I like reframed how I was thinking about it, and then I was like, oh, like this whole thing is just about Lucas having such a human moment and being, and just he formed the wrong opinion, because originally it made way more sense. I did a whole video about how Luke was like so suicidally depressed that he was like literally on the verge of insanity, and that's why everything that he said was factually wrong. That made way more sense to me to explain episode 8, um that Luke was like mentally insane. And so looking at it from this point of view, where it's like, yes, he's saying stuff that is wrong and sounds insane, but that was done on purpose by the writers. It wasn't like this accidental thing. And maybe it's just something about the way that Sam explained it, because he talks like a human and not a dictionary.
Wow. I'm copying
so-
so many strays today. This is outrageous.
So I always thought that like I have a number of different thoughts about like the Luke's exile, but the his I don't know, maybe you touched on this in your video, and not the him being suicidal or whatever, but like, did you get there in your um was it Kylo, or was it did you have a separate video about things not being people's fault? Was that one? Is that the same video or is that two different videos?
I think I think the three of us touched on that when we did the Kylo Ren Redemption podcast, and then I used those clips in my Kylo Ren video, and I want to say it was you, Rye, that was talking about how like nothing that happened in these films ended up being anyone's fault, which takes away all the gravity of all of
Wow.
these things.
Yeah. So that is ultimately my biggest well, I should say I have two principal problems with Luke's exile. The first one is the abdication of responsibility, which to me is I'm going to use this word, and even though I hate it, because it sounds pretentious as fuck. But like his abdication of responsibility is anathema to the character.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is probably the big roadblock that a lot of people run into. That you know this bad thing happened, or like a lot of people get hung up on the he wouldn't have tried to kill Kylo or whatever. But that's a whole another take thing that we could talk about. But it's the after that where he's like, this horrible thing happened and it's my fault. Um, where you have this sort of character break, um, where the real Luke would have gone like, so I fucked this up and now I'm gonna go and fix it. But what this Luke does is explains it away. He he incorrectly rationalizes um or the line of thinking that he has that he explains to Rey is what is it? It's not his ghost. It's his lie. It's
Yeah,
his
it's
lie
lie.
that he's telling to protect himself. Is I did this thing. This was my fault. But it's not really because of all this. It's the Jedi versus the Sith, and that's what created this whole problem. And this is not. And so I need to die. So I'm going to do this. I'm not abdicating responsibility. I'm going to go do this.
Right.
Which is how I would explain that, but it's still it runs into the problem of I don't see the character abdicating responsibility for what he did. That's the first thing. The second thing is that ultimately the original sin of the sequel trilogy, being Luke trying to kill Kylo, is, as I said in that video, not compelling because it is a romantic comedy misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
That is it. It is the opposite. What that moment should have been, and I think would have been way more compelling because I find that conflict to be ultimately not compelling is because the thing that people always say about Luke when they're talking about like why he wouldn't have, or maybe you could explain, Darth, if I'm gonna assume that we're on the same page as far as what most people think about like Luke and everything. That or could you posit why people say that Luke would not have killed Kylo or would not
Uh,
have tried to kill Kylo?
what is so often repeated is that it's the lesson that he already learned in episode 6. Therefore, he would not make the same mistake again now because he's already learned the lesson. That's what frequently you hear the fan base say.
Yeah, and that he looked at Vader, and Vader being the quintessential bad guy or the embodiment of evil, and he looks at him and goes, I can sense the good in him, and I can save him. Um, and that's why it's like, well, him having done that, he would never look at Kylo and go, I'm going to kill him, even for an instant, is the argument that they make. So my position on that is what should have happened, and I think I've said this to you before, David, is that he should have been like, he should be like, no, I looked at Darth Vader and I felt some good in there that I could tap into and I could save him. But I look at this kid. This kid is evil. He needs to die, and I can't do it. And that should have been his failure.
Yeah. And the problem with
Agreed.
that in this story is it requires so much time. Like, if that was the case, this is. Oh my god, I'm agreeing with Darth. This is the one time where you would have to show it on screen because you need to develop the sense that. And it could be montage, okay? But if that were the reason, right? And and exactly what Ryan just said, which is the reason is this kid is undeniably fucking evil. There is no salvaging this kid. You would need to divert a portion of your film to show that meaningfully. You need to show, right, if you want to commit to a character being bad, right? If you think about the first season of Avatar is a great example with Zuko, which I realize everyone uses as a reference, like a character that gets redeemed. But you'll see my point. You show them do something mean or bad to the heroes. You show them have someone appeal to them for remorse and have them not demonstrate remorse, and then you have them double down on not demonstrating that remorse when faced with the consequences of doing that bad thing. Right, that happens literally in the first episode of Avatar with Zuko and his granddad or whoever. Yes, right.
Counterpoint.
This became a debate format all of a sudden. I'd like a rebuttal, please.
All right, so I disagree that you would need any extra time, that you would need to add very much at all to the runtime of the movie in order to make that plot point work, because we've already seen him take part in the destruction of the Republic. He's directly a part of that. We saw him kill, with his introduction is him killing the old guy, the White Raven or the Three-Eyed Raven or whatever, and then beating and then torturing Poe. And then so he does a whole plethora of bad stuff in episode.
I forgot he's in the story.
Yeah,
in my head, I separated Ben Solo and Kylo Ren.
Yeah, he kills Han Solo. So like we've already seen the establishment of this is a bad guy. No, stick with me though. The establishment of this is
I completely agree with you. I had just forgotten.
Wait. There's more. So, and there's more to make this more compelling. So there's all of episode 7 establishing that Kylo is bad news. But then you also have the subplot of Rey going, "No, you're wrong. He's still good. I felt the good in him, and I'm gonna go do it." And then she goes and fails.
Right.
And so if you add that, that's already in the movie. If you add that on top of Luke going, "He was evil and I couldn't do it, and that was my failure."
Right.
That makes the whole thing much more compelling, and why he would and again you still run into the problem of the abdication of responsibility, but ultimately he couldn't kill him in the first place, so like it kind of makes sense that he would not then he wouldn't go try to face him again.
When you say,
I think
so, I agree completely. I forgot that they were the same character. Embarrassing. The other question
are you a Reylo now?
I just completely, in my head, I completely dissociated Ben Solo and Kylo Ren to the point where like that didn't even occur to me that he's the villain of the 3 films. The question that I want to put to you both is, in that scenario, is it that Luke couldn't emotionally bring himself to do it, or is it he couldn't physically do it because Kylo was too strong or too wily? Like, which,
no,
you know what I mean?
It has to be emotionally.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify. Because that I agree with that. The other take I've seen is that, and look, let's be honest, having Luke rebuild the Jedi Order in the way that is now canon in the Star Wars universe is such a fucking weird, like, it's like a common Luke L. It's so weird and framed so weirdly in the sequences we've seen in canon. I think in comparison to, and not to blow too much smoke up Timothy Zahn's ass, but in comparison to the Zahn trilogy, you get to see Luke go from the 25-year-old kid who was this war hero who did this thing that no one knows about into how do you get from there to Jedi Knight? And like, he spends so much time in that trilogy fucking around and just like really not having a sense of what he should be doing in the universe. And finally, at the end of it, he manages to find that drive to then go ahead and rebuild the Order. And he has that motivation. I wonder if part of the challenge with the context of the Luke Ben Solo thing is that the fact that there was a school as well, and they don't lean on how fucking evil it is that Kylo Ren, have Kylo Ren burn the fucking school down with all the kids inside or something. Like, give me, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Initially, they did until they didn't.
Oh, really?
Because there's this whole post Last Jedi, there is this whole rehabilitation of Kylo because of the Reylo thing. So like, and this goes to what Darth was saying in his video. It was not his fault. Is that Palpatine was corrupting his soul or something.
I remember
no,
this,
it was
yeah.
Snoke. Or Snoke corrupted him. And that was Palpatine actually. But when what happens is Kylo pulls or Ben, who is about to become Kylo, sees Luke about to kill him. He thinks that's another sticking point that I get into with a lot of people is that like when people go, "Oh, Luke didn't really try to kill Kylo." Like that's true, but that is not Kylo's truth. Kylo's truth is I woke up and bro was about to kill me, and so I pulled the roof down, and then Kylo just escaped, or Ben escapes and goes and becomes Kylo retroactively. Initially, the story I believe was that he took some of the students and killed the rest, and some of the students became the Knights of Ren.
Right.
Well, it should have been, yeah.
That makes way more sense.
And I think that was what the initial story was, and that later became Kylo pulled the roof down and just left, and Palpatine destroyed the school and killed everybody with Force lightning.
That fucking film sucks.
And none of that's in the movie.
God damn.
Yeah, that was like a comic book, I think.
Yeah,
of course it was.
So no, I'm pretty sure that is canon.
I think
according,
so. Yeah.
But like, yeah, that came
Exhausting.
with the rehabilitation of Kylo.
Okay, well, we could. Jesus, that is like.
I want to point out real quick that part of the problem is also that, ironically, the fight choreography in that scene, because if they had completely redone how that scene was shot, it would have played out so differently. Because Kylo force pulls the lightsaber. He sees Luke, wakes up, sees Luke. He force pulls his lightsaber to him, and then blocks Luke's blow. But if Luke never swung at him, how did he block the blow? So therefore, Luke did try to kill him.
Well, he's holding it there, like
from his point of view.
Yeah, that again, Kylo is not a reliable narrator in that scenario.
No, I'm saying, well, it is.
It happens in both scenes, and in Luke's perspective too.
We were talking about what were we talking about? The thing when we were talking about Ben-Hur and how Lucas was able to pull that off, and how some people try to do a thing and it doesn't work. This is Rashomon done badly, is what this is.
Yep.
Versus, and now the thing is that I think Johnson is a good director, and I will say that because he does it in Knives Out the way that it's supposed to be done, where like when he's interviewing the different people, they all have their different versions of the party, and like that's Rashomon, right?
Yeah.
Because every situation is whoever's telling the story is they are the ones who are next to him blowing out the grandfather blowing out the candles, or they are all in the best light in the shots of what they're talking about.
Yeah, and Brick does that really effectively as well. Right out of the gate, where like everyone has a different view that makes them look good of why the protagonist's girlfriend disappeared, and everyone tells this different version of events that you have to work through to get to the truth. I mean, yeah, Johnson clearly understands those levers. I just
he doesn't do it effectively, though.
Yes, and I think it's a missed opportunity to not exactly what you said, which is like make him fully evil to then give Luke something to grapple with. But I guess to try and wrap this together, because we got to get out of here at some point. One of the biggest challenges I think that this produces for a character like Luke as we reintroduce him into the story is exactly what Sam said, but I want to add like a just an element of what we've talked about here, which is people don't like seeing him this way. But then when we get the explanation or we get the context for why he is this way, it doesn't feel sufficient to move him into that place. I think, and I don't know if this is true, because this is like a what ifism. I think even if we'd seen the whole dang thing of him going from like Jedi Knight to like sad hermit man, if the reason why that happened didn't feel like it stuck the landing, I don't think seeing it on screen would make it any better or different for me personally, right? I don't think that seeing Katniss go from the sort of triumphant revolutionary hero at the end of that second story to you know, suicidal, depressed person dealing with all of this trauma. If the reason wasn't sufficient for Luke, I'm not sure that it would matter if we had seen it. With Katniss, it's different because the reason is like it suddenly hits her like a ton of bricks that she's killed a ton of people. She's gonna have to kill a ton more people, and she has put herself in a position where she is this like vacant figurehead who is ultimately just a killer, right? That is not the same motivating lie, well, I guess that's the ghost, right? That is not the same motivating ghost that haunts Luke, that pushes Luke into this place. That has way more oomph to it than my nephew, bad kid, misunderstanding, oopsie doopsie, school burned down. It doesn't have the same valence to me and the same impact and gravity and weight. And I think it's the lack of that weight of getting him there that is ultimately why it doesn't end up feeling right for the story it's in, to me.
Yeah, that's if you go, and you have, if you go look at if you watch my videos in order, like my initial thoughts were the problem with Luke is that we didn't get to see it, and then fast forward to the video where I talk about failure. There, I'm saying it's because it's not compelling. Ultimately, it's the problem.
Yeah.
Is the conflict. There was another thought that I had that your discussion with Sam had triggered on Grumpy Luke, which is or different ways potentially to get him there is which could be interesting to explore. The thing that keeps rattling around in my head that David says is when you take interesting ideas and put them into conversation with each other. I am still trying to wrap my head around what that means, but it just sounds so good. But no, so the idea of Luke, I could see, because I think you had said in that video that Lucas was also going to do that to him, going to have
Not in the same fashion.
Not in the same fashion, no, but
But he was gonna have him like hermitized, or living secluded and alone. And because the entire premise was not about Luke being depressed. It was about why do people keep thinking of Jedi as hermits. And that's what we were exploring.
That's, but like that, yeah. So that sent this is again a section I had to rewind because like this sent me off in this train of thought of Luke has no one, well, aside from, well, the problem with this is that as the Star Wars universe continues to expand, there are more and more someones. But Luke initially has no one that he does not have a shared experience. Or he's got nobody to he does not have anybody that he can sit down with and have a conversation about the stuff that he's gone through. This is kind of like when the idea of like you put two veterans together and they can talk about things that they can't talk about with other people who don't understand or like fundamentally do not understand what they're talking about. Luke does not have anybody like that. he can't go and like, this is what happened in the throne room, and the other person would be able to empathize or
Right.
sympathize.
Because
I mean, Obi-Wan, Yoda, Anakin.
well,
No,
but
alive.
yeah, like I mean,
he can talk to them.
Zahn's answer to that is Mara Jade, right? And you can say whatever you will about how edgy she ends up being initially, but like, that's the reason why they click together, is they both have these fucking experiences of dealing with the Emperor and dealing with Darth Vader, and realizing that their view of their place in that history is not at all the actual reality of their place in the history of those things, where Mara Jade has this completely overblown sense of self-importance, and when she learns, like, you weren't the hand of the Emperor, you were one of many. And that, in the same way that Luke learns, like, oh, no one actually like knows who the fuck I am. No one knows what happened in that throne room. No one realizes like what I did to Darth Vader or who Darth Vader is. My place in history is not what I thought it was. That's 100% right. The other thing I'm reminded of, right, is the very late in the game in Mad Men and in the last season, it's when Don Draper's run away from his life and he's traveling around America. He has that, he goes
VFW.
Yeah, he has that drinking session with all the veterans, and it's the first time since like the first season where he's like talked about the war, and it's exactly that moment, and it completely changes the direction for him, after that.
And I think in that scene, isn't he like straight up with them as like, yeah, I killed my commanding officer.
Yeah, he's
and
honest
like,
with them.
And they're like, yeah, we get it.
Initially, and then I think the implication is that that's why they beat him up, and the kid plants the money on him. But yeah, there's a whole other can of worms there. But I just think it's interesting that yeah, you go searching in this story for something for Luke to do with this stuff that is haunting him, and exactly what Darth just said, ironically, the only fucking person he's got to talk to is Yoda, who was pretending to be a hermit when they first clicked up, and he's the guy that failed all of this shit. That's like, the empathy isn't there because he's like, well, you're the reason why all this bad shit happened to me. It's not like it's not shared trauma at this point. It's your fucking fault, dude. Like, and that to me, I think, is where Yoda becomes an insufficient sounding board. Also, Yoda, terrible with people's feelings. You remember that scene in Revenge of the Sith where Anakin goes to him and he's like, Yoda, man, like, my girlfriend, it's complicated, I need to talk to somebody. And Yoda's like, feelings are don't feel anything, dude. And it's every time that someone goes to Yoda for emotional support, the answer is, get rid of these connections, stop feeling these things, just don't push that shit away, get rid of it. And so to me, there's no one worse in the universe than Yoda for this kind of support. Obi-Wan would be a better therapist than Yoda, is my feeling. Like, I feel like
really
lied to him.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Something you just like said was that all three of them were kind of like massive failures, and that's who is left to teach Luke.
Yeah.
So like Yoda's influence is what helped bring down the entire Jedi Order, and then he lost in the fight to Palpatine, and then Anakin lost himself to the dark side, nearly killed his wife, all of this other stuff. Obi-Wan allowed Anakin to fall without seeing it, without stopping the relationship with Padme, and so all of them are like, hey, this is all the stuff we failed at, Luke. Now we're gonna train you.
You know who the real homie should be? I think the solution here is Mace Windu survived, and he and Anakin click up as old men, and they just like they're at the bar drinking their blue milk, just telling war stories and shit. Let's go.
All right, well, right at the 2-hour mark, I think that's a pretty good spot to end.
Yeah, considering we were like, oh, we'll just press go, but obviously, I think realistically this will be a response to that one scene with Sam, so you should watch these in order. It would be insane to watch this, or you could do a classic Star Wars, watch this first and then watch the original.
So you need to take this section and put it at the beginning of the video.
Yeah. Oh my god. that would do some people's heads in. Yeah, this is the prologue exactly. Darth, you got anything else?
A very long TikTok.
like, yeah, just the context keeps changing. Darth, do you have any other upcoming projects you want to plug? You were talking a little bit about the Acolyte. That's coming out soon.
Ironically, my my Acolyte video keeps getting longer and longer, and like it's 15 pages, and the second half of it isn't even about the Acolyte anymore. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'm pulling in a lot of research that I read going through reading the 7 Habits of Very Successful People, and then also Save the Cat. A bunch of really interesting stuff that reading both those books, and like, oh, that reminds me of Acolyte. That's something also. That's what Star Wars fans say. So all kinds of really interesting stuff that I'm just writing and writing, and eventually I'll start I'll start filming.
Deep in the source on that one. That's what you want to be doing. Right, what about you? You got anything cooking? You got any gas in the chamber?
I am figuring out this shorts game. So I'm trying to chop up the last couple videos that you all have posted to interesting shorts.
Cool.
I have written a little bit about the Acolyte, but I have very limited time in the evenings in order to think about anything. So hopefully I will be able to do something about that eventually, but don't hold your breath.
Okay. For now, stay posted and follow Rye on YouTube for that powerful shorts game. You'll love to see it. Look, if you guys are here, you know what it is. ZeroIndent.com for everything. If you want to support us, patreon.com/ZeroIndent. Help keep independent media crit alive. And of course, go follow both these gents in the comments if you don't already. That seems impossible to me. I feel like our audiences are a single Venn diagram. But if you're not already subscribed to them, you should be. Also, you can go to underink.press to find our merch. When you're hearing this, which will be in about a week from when we record it, we will have our holiday season lineup of merch will be live. That's a whole new range of tees, a whole new range of hoodies, all themed after some of the more important things we've talked about. You can get yourself a writ large hoodie. There's a Guattari Felix Question of Machines, awesome piece of artwork that was done by a very talented artist. And all kinds of other things. You can, of course, get the Daredevil and the Details icon tee, which a lot of people have been grabbing recently. So grab that stuff while it's available. That'll do it for us. Fellas, take us out with that classic Star Wars outro.
Wait, hold on. Does Patrick have any final words?
Hey, Pat, what's... he's... I think he's tuck it out, man. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, nothing?
I hear light snoring.
This guy's dead.
Say the Star Wars thing.
May the Force be with you, always.
Goodbye there.
If you like these handcrafted studies of genre fiction, please head over to zeroindent.com or patreon.com/zeroindent if you'd like to consider supporting us. Even if you just give us a follow on Patreon, that helps us out. Leave a comment, a like, and if you're in a financial position to do so, you can support us and get access to early content, additional videos, director's commentaries, audio diaries, and all kinds of different things we have coming up. It really makes a difference helping keep independent media crit alive. Once again, that is zeroindent.com or patreon.com/zeroindent if you'd like to support us.